Bet365 sponsors our podcast and they feature over 300,000 sporting events on their betting app. It's got everything you need to bet on sport. The new season is already underway and Bet365 are offering a wide range of markets, including first, last or anytime goal scorers. With over 45 million members, it's the world's favourite online betting company. With the Bet365 Bet Builder, you can combine match results, players to score, number of goals and more to create your own personalised bet. And if you can't watch the games live, with Bet365's Match Live feature, you can follow every moment through live graphics and text. Bet365 is the world's favourite online sport betting company. The app can be downloaded from Google Play and Apple App Store. Over 18s only. Please gamble responsibly. Hi folks, welcome to the 59th Minute FPL podcast, which is brought to you by The Athletic. I'm Mark McGettigan, better known in the fantasy football world as FPL General. Game week 1 is just around the corner, so it's time to really start tinkering and planning now and get those players locked into your initial squad. For any new listeners, this podcast will follow the same structure every week once the season starts, which will be a game week review, a watch list update, Twitter questions answered, and I'll always finish off by talking about captaincy and transfers for the upcoming game week, and all of that gets covered in around 30 to 40 minutes. So I always try to keep these podcasts short and snappy, to the point, so that they're easy for you to consume before the deadline. Now this episode and next week's episode may be a little bit longer, but once the season kicks off, it will be back to the usual duration. This episode and next week's episode will be a bit different than usual as we are still in pre-season. Today I'm going to talk more about strategy, then next week will be more focused on which players and teams to target for game week 1. Now I say today's is going to be more about strategy. I'm also going to touch on, just exactly how I'm going to approach this season, what I've been reflecting on over the last couple of weeks since last season finished, and what I'm going to bring into the new season. If you are not yet an Athletic subscriber, you can try it for free for 30 days by visiting theathletic.com/FPL pod, and in doing so you'll get access to my FPL articles there, and you'll also be able to listen to this podcast ad free. I'm going to start by talking about my approach to this new season. So regular listeners from last season will know that I had an A4 sheet of paper printed out and pinned up on my office wall above my computer for the duration of the season, and it was something I always referred to each week when it came to making my transfers and captains and stuff like that. I called it my golden rules, but rule is a strong word to use because you've always got to be flexible in FPL. I would say it's more a list of guidelines for me to follow throughout the season. So what I've done now is, over the last few weeks, I've ripped down the old one and I've drawn up a new one. So the next couple of bullet points are going to be taken from that. I'm just going to discuss, what I've been thinking about for the last few weeks and how I'm going to change my approach to the game this season. So some of you will find this interesting. Some of it might shock you. Some of it might seem a bit extreme, but it feels what's right for me. So, on reflecting on last season, I had a pretty good season after having a disaster the year before. And I think for me, as an FPL manager, I think I'm pretty good when it comes to managing my team, making transfers and stuff like that. But I think my weakness is I don't manage myself very well. So that is my main change this season. It's more about how do I manage myself better, not so much how do I manage my team better. And hopefully if I can get a better handle of how I manage myself as an FPL manager, then managing the team will come after that naturally. So first couple of bullet points on my new list of guidelines for the new season. My overall approach this season is going to be to reduce the noise. So it's not really to do with managing my FPL team. It's more about managing all the information that's out there. It's managing how much time I spend looking at FPL content, listening to FPL content. So I think last season my overall strategy was to minimise transfers. So again, that's something I'll probably still do anyway. But this season it's more about myself, and it's how much time I spend invested in FPL. So overall strategy, written in capital letters at the top of the sheet, is reduce the noise. The how am I going to do that? There's a couple of things. The main ones are to spend less time on FPL Twitter. FPL Twitter is a brilliant place for information. There's so many brilliant people on there, but I'm guilty, as I'm sure many of the listeners are as well, of spending too much time on there. You probably, without knowing it, you're probably checking it 20, 25, 30 times a day, and most of the time you're not really missing too much. So for me, I really need to cut back on how much time I spend on Twitter. I'll also be using the mute function a lot more on Twitter, which I advise all of you to do as well. Any accounts that don't add value, just press the mute button, then you don't need to see them anymore. And it really improves the overall Twitter experience. Now that doesn't just go for FPL Twitter, that goes for if you use Twitter for other things as well. The mute function is your friend. Mute people, mute words, mute hashtags. Anything you don't want to see, just mute it, and you will enjoy Twitter a lot more. What else am I going to do? I'm going to cut down on the number of FPL podcasts I listen to. Now, again, there's so many brilliant FPL podcasts out there. For the last couple of seasons, I'd probably easily get through 2 FPL podcasts a day. But when you think of it, that's roughly 10 podcasts a week. So it's a lot of information coming in. And it definitely can cloud your judgment. So I'm going to cut back, and I'm going to probably listen to 2 or 3 a week maximum. I'm going to focus on my favourite ones. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to upset anyone. But yeah, I'm going to cut back on the podcast. And I think the important thing for me as someone who has their own FPL podcast, I'm not going to listen to any other FPL podcasts until I've recorded my own one on a Tuesday morning, because I found in the past I may listen to a podcast on a Sunday night or on a Monday during the day. Then when it comes to recording my own podcast, those things that were mentioned in the other FPL podcasts are in the back of my mind, and I find myself almost saying some of the things that the other people have said. So it definitely does get into your thinking. So I'm going to record my own podcast every Tuesday morning. Monday night or Tuesday morning, and only then will I listen to some other FPL podcasts. The other thing I'm going to do as well, before I listen to any other fantasy podcast, and I think this is good advice for listeners as well, write down your initial thoughts at the start of the game week. So let's say Sunday night, Monday morning, look ahead to the next game week, ask yourself, are you going to bank a transfer, or which transfers are you thinking about making? Which player do you think is the best captain? Write it all down, keep it, come back to it on Friday, and ask yourself, has my thinking changed, and why has it changed? Has it changed because I've read so much? Has it changed because I've listened to so much, or been communicating with lots of other fantasy managers? It's always good to have that reference point from the start of the week. Sunday night, Monday morning, what was your thoughts before you started consuming lots of FPL content? So that's, again, before I listen to any other podcasts or read any other FPL content, I'll be making sure I write down my own thoughts for the week ahead, and then I'll go back to it on Friday night when I'm making my transfers. In relation to Twitter as well, that's where I spend a lot of my time. I'll be leaving all of the Twitter group chats I'm in. I'm in about 3 or 4 group chats, and my problem is I've probably got a bit of OCD or something, that if I go into an FPL group chat, let's say I haven't been on Twitter for a couple of days, which rarely happens itself, but let's say I'm away for a weekend and I log into Twitter on a Monday, and I go into one of my group chats and there's 400 messages. I find that I can't really ignore them. I need to read them. It's that thing, you think you're missing something, but 99% of the time you're not. So I think for me the simple solution, in order for me to spend less time on Twitter, is to leave all of those Twitter group chats. That will free up a lot more time for me, and again, it just won't cloud my judgment with other managers' thoughts feeding into my thought process. Basically, I want to have tunnel vision this season. I want to have a clear view ahead of me on what I want to do and how I want to play the game that doesn't get influenced by the crowd. So overall, I want to reduce the noise, and that's a couple of things I'm going to be doing this season. Another major bullet point on this sheet of paper I've got is to be less emotionally invested in the game. This is another thing I need to improve on. I'm too emotionally invested in the game. I spend too much time at the weekends checking scores, checking live ranks, checking games, and I'm going to step back from that this season. As someone who works full time in FPL, I spend Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, essentially, working on FPL, writing articles, recording podcasts, talking to FPL managers. And when it comes to the deadline on a Friday evening or a Saturday morning, I really just want to switch off, because I've already spent 5 or 6 days with FPL on my mind. So that's something I'm going to try and do a lot more this season. Again, how am I going to do that? I'm going to ignore looking at my overall rank as much as possible. Now, I've written down here, the only time I care about my overall rank is game week 38. So why should I bother looking at it at any point before then? I've said many times on previous podcasts, I wish the overall rank wasn't visible on the FPL website when you log in, because it clouds your judgment. Again, it affects your thinking, affects your transfers, it affects your captains. If you're halfway through the season and you're 2 million rank, you're going to start doing things slightly differently. But for me, I want to ignore my overall rank as much as possible. Something else I'm going to do is, there is an excellent website called livefpl.net. Now, I've used it many times myself. It's very good in particular for information about ownership and stuff like that. But I'm going to block myself from it this season because, again, it's a fantastic website. But what I find is I spend too much time visiting it. So, especially the live rank feature. I go on a Friday. If there's a Friday night game, I'll check my live rank on a Friday night. I'll check it on a Saturday night. And I'll check it on a Sunday night. And again, it's completely pointless. So, I'm going to avoid looking at my overall rank as much as possible this season. And again, game week 38 is the only time that it really matters. No one ever asks you what was your rank in game week 27, what was your rank in game week 13. So I'm just going to try and ignore it as much as possible. I'm also going to join very few mini leagues, and I'm going to ban myself from clicking into them. So I'm not going to allow myself. I'm only going to be in 5 or 6 mini leagues. The ones I have to be in, the ones I run, and stuff like that. I'm going to ban myself from clicking into them because a bad habit I have is I click into a mini league, I see where I'm ranked. I'll get annoyed if I'm not ranked near the top for a start, and then I'll start clicking into teams, particularly high profile managers who I respect, also managers who are probably ahead of me in the mini league. I'm looking at their players, I'm looking at who they're captaining, all that kind of stuff. And again, it's something I want to get away from. I want to have tunnel vision. I don't want to be influenced by other players, other managers, and what they're doing. So I'm going to join very few mini leagues, and I'm not going to click into them, because I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of looking at 5 or 6 different managers' teams over the course of 20 minutes or half an hour. The main reason for that is it's FOMO, fear of missing out. If you're let's say you're in a small mini league, let's say there's 10 of you. Let's say it's your most important mini league. If you log in there every week and you look at the other, the players that other managers have. Let's say you're the only manager in the league that doesn't have De Bruyne. Let's say the other 9 all have him. Straight away you're going to be struck by fear. You're going to feel like you need to go and get him because this guy can really hurt you, if you don't have him. But yes, that is the case if he does well. But on the flip side, if he doesn't do well, and let's say you have Sterling instead, and Sterling's on fire, you're going to shoot to the top of that mini league pretty quickly. So never let fear rule your transfers is the big one, and that's why I'm going to stop looking at other people's FPL teams in mini leagues. I just want to play my own game. I'm going to let them worry about me. Let them look into my team. Which players I have, which players I'm captaining. But I'm not going to do that for them. A big one for me is going to be the Match of the Day challenge. Now, you've probably seen me tweeting about this a couple of times over the last couple of seasons. For those of you who don't know what it is, Match of the Day is the highlights programme in the UK, which is on TV every Saturday night at 10:30, and also on Sunday morning. For those who have the young kids, will know about that one. So the idea behind the Match of the Day challenge is on a Saturday morning, you switch off your phone and you avoid all of the scores in the Premier League that day. And then you sit down at 10:30 at night without knowing anything. You don't know, any of the team news. You don't know any of the scores from the day. And you sit down for an hour and a half, and you watch your FPL points hopefully roll in. Now, what I like about this is, and I know a lot of other people do it as well, Again, it goes back to my bullet point. I want to be less emotionally invested in the game. Particularly from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. on a Saturday. We all know what that's like. If there's 5 or 6 games on, it's a roller coaster. You're up, you're down, you're up, you're down. And I want to get away from that because, I'm sure I'm not the only one that will admit this. If I'm on my phone from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock on a Saturday, every 5 minutes, for the updates, maybe I'm watching Gillette Soccer Saturday or BT Sports Score on the TV as well. I'm on Twitter. There's a lot going on there, and there's a lot of emotion. So, if things don't go well for me from a 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock on a Saturday, I'll be the first to admit it. I'm probably not not very nice to be around for maybe 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock if I've had a bad FPL day. So what I want to do is take the emotion away. There's nothing you can do. You have absolutely no control over your FPL team after the deadline. So what I'm going to do every Saturday this season, and I'm determined to do this every Saturday, once the deadline arrives at 11 o'clock on a Saturday, my Wi-Fi's off, my phone's off, and I'm going to go out and enjoy the day with my wife. We'll do something, get away, go have a few drinks, whatever it is, and then have a beer in the fridge for 10:30 that night, sit down, watch match of the day, and whatever will be in terms of a green arrow or a red arrow. I did it in game week 38 last season. I didn't do it very often last season, but I did it in game week 38, which is a bizarre time to do it, really, because all the games are at the same time, and it's quite an enjoyable day to follow the games. But I just really enjoyed it. I had a great day during the day that Sunday. We were away for the weekend, and I sat down that night and enjoyed match of the day probably more than I ever have. All the relegation drama, the Champions League places, all that kind of stuff. So I know match of the day challenge is not for everyone. A lot of people love that, especially 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock period on a Saturday when all the goals are flying in. But for me this season, I'm going to step away from it, and I'm going to watch match of the day at night time without knowing anything. So we'll see how long I can stick to that. So don't be surprised this season if my Twitter timeline is very quiet on a Saturday afternoon. Wouldn't it be great if every clothing store you shopped at had only your size, what styles you like, and at the price you want? Well, there is a company focused on making that happen. Stitch Fix is an online personal styling company that makes getting the clothes you love effortless. It's a completely different way to shop that's all about you every time. To get started, go to stitchfix.co.uk/59th to set up your profile, and they'll deliver great looks personalised just for you in your colours, styles and budget. You pay a £10 styling fee for each fix, which is credited towards anything you keep. Schedule at any time, there's no subscription required. Plus, shipping, returns and exchanges are easy and free. Stitch Fix does the hard work for you, making great styles effortless for men and women. Get started today at stitchfix.co.uk/59th. Make sure to use the show name to support our podcast. That's stitchfix.co.uk/59th. The other thing I've written down here is no phone during matches. Give the game 100% focus. Avoid Twitter in particular during a game, because you end up missing 15 or 20 minutes of the game, going down a rabbit hole on Twitter. For me, the eye test is always number one, so I need to watch the game with 100% focus. So for me, when I do sit down to watch a live game this season, I'll be putting my phone in another room, because we all do it now. We're sitting watching a game on 2 or 3 screens. We've got the TV on with a game, we've got the phone on social media, we might have an iPad on with something else, with stats or something. And if you actually analysed yourself, if you recorded yourself watching a game nowadays compared to 10 years ago, you probably spend a lot less time actually with your eyes on the television. So again, that's something I just want to improve on, is when I'm watching a game, watch the 90 minutes and don't look at any other screens while I'm doing that. So that is some of the information I've got on my new list of guidelines in terms of managing myself. I'm going to talk now a little bit about managing my team. So I've also got this on the same A4 sheet of paper, but this is more in terms of FPL and managing my team throughout the season. Now, I think there's a few questions later about my rules from last season. Has anything changed? Not a lot has changed, but I will come back to that in the question section after this. So just going to run through the bullet points here I've got under managing my team. The first one is focus transfers in midfield and attack. So aim to set and forget the goalkeeper and the defenders as much as possible. So when I'm building my Game Week 1 team, I'll be setting up long term, especially with my goalkeeper and my defenders. I'll be trying to bring in, pick players in the first game week that I hopefully can keep long term. So that will allow me to focus my transfers, more exciting up front and in midfield, maybe around the captaincy a bit more than I've done in the past. So that's the first one. My transfers, most of the time I hope to make them in attack. Second bullet point, and a very important one for me, because it's something I really need to improve on. Captaincy will be at the heart of all of my planning this season. So Captaincy was really weak for me last season. I think I only got around 450 points from captaincy, and I've seen people get 550, 600, maybe even more captain points. So it's an area I need to improve on. How I'm going to do that is, every decision I make, every long-term plan I make, I'm going to have captaincy at the heart of it. So I'm going to be thinking, when I'm setting up my Game Week 1 team now, I'm going to be looking at the first maybe 6 to 8 game weeks. I'm going to look at the fixtures individually for each game week and think, who's the best captain that week? Or who are the best 2 captains that week? And can I own one of them so that I can put the armband on them? So I'm going to think long-term with my captaincy decisions this season, and hopefully that will result in improved performance in that area. Another bullet point is I'm going to look at team stats more often. Now, I don't look at stats as much as other people do. I do look at them every week. I do watch the games first, and then I'll look at the stats afterwards just to see, if the stats match up with what I've seen with my own eyes, or maybe my eyes have told me something that I wanted them to tell me, and the stats can help me to be more objective in that sense. I can pick holes in my own eye test. Then I always look at player stats. The usual ones: your shots on target for strikers, chances created midfielders, touches in the opposition penalty area for defenders, all that kind of stuff that a lot of us already do. But something I don't do enough of is look at team stats. Looking at, because when you want a defender in FPL, it's not up to the defender to get the clean sheet. It's the whole defence and the goalkeeper and the whole team really. So, and in terms of attacking players as well, how many chances are a team creating? Which teams are having the most goal attempts, shots on target? Which teams have the best defensive numbers? Because then maybe I want to target defenders from that team. So it's something I just haven't done enough of in the past, and it's something I want to do more of now. Is when I'm looking at player stats, always remember to look at the team stats as well. Ignore player ownership. Focus on getting as many points as possible week to week. So I've already mentioned that ownership is something I haven't really ever looked at too much, and I already find myself being affected by it slightly in pre-season. People are saying, Werner's got 40% ownership, De Bruyne's got massive ownership, before the blank was announced, and it does get into your thinking. So I'm determined not to let ownership ever dictate my decisions. If I'm going to pick Kevin De Bruyne or Raheem Sterling in Game Week 2 or Game Week 3, ownership for me won't come into it. I will try and have tunnel vision and just think, which of these 2 players do I think is going to get me the most points over the next weeks and months, and just ignore the ownership. Because again, at the end of the day in FPL, points is what you're after, and points is all that matters. Always remain flexible. Nothing is ever set in stone. So I think this is important as well. If any of you go and draw up your own list of guidelines or rules after the back of this podcast, always remember that nothing is ever set in stone. You've always got to be flexible. You've always got to move with the season. And there may be times where you have to adjust some of your rules during the season. Don't be stubborn. Move with the times, because FPL changes from season to season. Friday night transfers, unless cash is an issue for planned moves. So I'm very happy the FPL deadline has been changed to an hour and a half before. I'm hoping it's going to cut out all the early team news, because what I found was I've always been a manager who likes to make my transfers on a Friday night and not log into the FPL website on a Saturday morning, because I think a lot of bad decisions get made in that last half an hour, or last even 15 minutes before a deadline. You're not thinking as clear as you would be maybe the day before. So I want to make my transfers on a Friday night this season, then not have to worry about it on a Saturday morning. The only time you'll probably see me making early moves is if I've got 0.0 million in the bank for the transfers that I need to make. Don't worry about team value. There's always a solution. This is a line from a very good Meet the Manager series on YouTube. It was Tom Freeman who said it. Tom's a bit like me. He doesn't worry about making early moves. He doesn't let the price changes dictate his transfers. And he said there's always a solution. And that really stood out to me in that video. So don't worry about team value. I never really have. And there is always a solution. If you get priced out of a player, there's always another player, and the most expensive player of the two is not always the best option. So that is my approach. I'm not going to worry about team value. Don't let fear rule transfers and captaincy decisions. I kind of touched on that already. Very important to not be swayed by ownership and stuff like that, and seeing lots of other people doing something. If lots of people are captaining a player that you don't have on Twitter, don't worry, and always remember Twitter is a very, very small percentage of the overall FPL game. This is a big one for me as well. Focus on the decision-making process, not the outcome. Very important for all FPL managers. We will make good decisions that have bad outcomes. We will captain a player who was the right captaincy choice, who will get sent off, who will get miss penalties, who will get 2-pointers. Don't focus on the result, focus on the decision-making process. And that's very hard to do. You can beat yourself up if something doesn't go right, but if you rewind back to Friday before the deadline, it was the right choice. So don't beat yourself up. So try and get in the habit of doing that. Don't focus on what's happened in the game week. Focus on the decisions you made before the game week and ask yourself, was that a good decision before the game week unfolded, or was it a bad decision? And that's how you should assess things. That is it for the bullet points on my new list of guidelines. So I'll be very interested to hear what your thoughts are on those. There's a lot to chew on there, so you can reply in a tweet to the podcast, with your thoughts. Do you like beer? Do you like free beer? As a valued listener, we'd like to bestow upon you just that. Thanks to our good pals at beer52.com, you have the opportunity to sip 8 delicious, painstakingly sourced craft beers from around the world. All you need to do is go to www.beer52.com/athletic and cover just the postage of £4.95. Got to pay that postie. And as if that wasn't enough, as a listener of the 59th Minute FPL podcast, you'll get 2 extra free beers. So that's 10 free beers. Beer 52 are beer pioneers. They traverse the globe to find the best and most interesting beer from the greatest small batch breweries planet Earth has to offer. No surprise then that they are the world's most popular craft beer discovery club. Each month, Beer 52 delivers a case with a different theme. Themes have included Germany, Korea, Belgium, South Africa, California, New Zealand and many more, but they haven't forgotten their roots. As an independent UK company, Beer 52 are also passionate about the UK craft beer scene. The beauty of Beer 52 is that you can leave any time, the power is in your hands. As well as the best, most interesting beer money can buy, your case will include the award-winning craft beer magazine Ferment, which explains the theme and individual beers you'll receive, and a beery snack is thrown in just to top it all off. Don't like dark beers? Choose the light plan. Easy. Just go to beer52.com/athletic to get your case free, and don't forget right now, listeners to the 59th Minute get 2 extra free beers. Now it's time for me to stop talking about myself and to tackle some of your questions from Twitter. So throughout the season, every Monday I will put up a tweet for questions for the podcast, so you can find those at FPL General. Thanks to everyone who sent them in this week. First one I will tackle is from David Gibson. Will the pandemic affect your approach? It strikes me that points hits may be more of a necessity this season. Does saving your transfers / avoiding hokey-cokey moves become more important? So, first of all, will the pandemic affect my approach? Yes, I think it will. And I think the first way it will affect my approach is I'm not going to wildcard early unless I have an absolute disaster and score 25 points every week for the first few weeks. I just think, we are still in a global pandemic, and I can't see there not being fixture disruption this season. Especially as we get towards the winter months. So for that reason, that's one of the main reasons I'm not going to wildcard early. I want to have the most powerful tool that we have in FPL available if things do get messy in terms of fixtures later. I promised myself I wouldn't mention Messi in this podcast, but I did it by accident there. So, what was I saying? The wildcard approach. I think there is a question about wildcards, early wildcards as well, so I will come back to it. But definitely the pandemic will affect my approach in terms of the wildcard. I'm going to keep it in case there's fixture disruption later. Also, I think there's probably an argument to be made that we could probably spend a bit more cash on our bench this season because, let's say, even if a game doesn't get called off, there could be certain teams where 1 or 2 players have to self-isolate and they miss a game or two. So it's probably going to be quite important to have players on your bench who play at least. They don't have to be world beaters. They can be 4.5 million defenders who will play every week. There's probably an argument to be made as well for having 2 goalkeepers this season. Just in case one of the games gets called off or one of them has to self-isolate. The I'm still leaning towards just having one goalkeeper though, and hoping for the best that doesn't happen. But yes, definitely, I think we do need to keep the pandemic in our minds this season. I think it's going to be probably an FPL season like no other. Obviously, last season was a season like no other, but again, I think this one could be carnage along the way. So I think having the wild card for me is a good idea. Question from FPL Goats: bench Manchester United assets for game week 1 and save a transfer in game week 2, or leave some cash in the bank and get Manchester United assets in game week 2. So yeah, this is one of the biggest questions we have to ask ourselves, for the next 10 days or so. Manchester City and Manchester United don't play in game week 1, so how do we approach getting their players in? Now, my current thinking is I'm going to start without Manchester City players, and I'm going to start with one Manchester United player on my bench. Now, I don't know if that will be Mason Greenwood at 7.5 million or Bruno Fernandes at 10.5 million. So I'm definitely going to have one of those two in my game week 1 squad, and they will be on my bench ready to be unleashed in game week 2 against Crystal Palace. In terms of Manchester City, I don't mind starting without them because obviously they don't play the first week. They've got a tough fixture against Wolves the second week, and then I think it's Leicester at home in game week 3. So I'm probably going to go down the same path a lot of people are going to go down. They're going to have Aubameyang for the first 2 weeks for the good fixtures, and then Aubameyang is your placeholder for a Raheem Sterling or a Kevin De Bruyne. So that's where I'm thinking as well. So that will leave me with probably 2 players from the Manchester clubs come game week 3, and then maybe look to add a few more afterwards. So I do like the idea of having one on the bench. I think it's doable. You can get 11 players on the pitch, even with a Bruno Fernandes on the bench. I think it's possible for game week 1. But again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. You can go hard into game week 1, and then take, you can even take a hit or two game week 2, game week 3 to get your Brunos, to get your De Bruynes, and your Martials and these guys. So it just depends how you want to play it. But for me, I'm going to try and avoid the hits, I think, and just start with a United player game week 1 and then get a City player probably game week 3. Question from FPL Sponge: when do you usually use your first wildcard in a season? And does the blank game week 1 change the optimal wildcard strategy this season? So when do I usually play it? If I go back to my most successful seasons, I would say I would have always played my wildcard pretty early, probably game week maybe 4, 5 or 6. Last season I played it later than ever, game week 19, the latest point possible. I think it was towards the end of December, mainly because I just didn't feel the need to play it before then. I was quite happy with my squad. What will I be doing this season? I think I'll be keeping the first one for a while, as long as things go decently for me over the first couple of game weeks, for the reasons I already mentioned. Sponge mentions here, what is the optimal wildcard strategy this season? I think the answer to that is we don't know. We never know what the optimal wildcard strategy is until the season has played out and we can reflect on it. Now, I think we're going to see more early wildcards than ever this season. We're going to see people wildcard game week 2 to get the Manchester United and the Manchester City players. Don't forget Burnley and Villa as well. I always feel bad when I don't mention them. Charlie Taylor, Chris Wood, a lot of good options there at Burnley as well. You're going to see people are going to wildcard game week 2 and game week 3, and it could pay off. The people who are more patient, maybe they'll be rewarded later if there is fixture disruption. We just don't know, and there's no right or wrong way to do this. If you think early wildcard is the right way to go, do that. If you think, like me, more patient may be better, do that. It's completely up to you. Don't be influenced by other people. Do what you think is right. I think there's a question about team value later, so I'll probably come back to this wildcard subject in another question. The key to everything here is, and the answer to most questions is, do what you think is right. Have a good think about it, and do what you think is right and what matches with your own style of play as an FPL manager. FPL Bohemian asks, how do you fancy going big on Liverpool defensive assets, Trent, Robertson and Van Dijk for the triple up? What are my thoughts on this? My thoughts are that I'm very, very tempted, to be honest. My latest draft has Salah, Trent and Robertson. I'm pretty sure I will stick with the double defence, but part of me is tempted to get rid of Salah and get Van Dijk and go all in on the triple Liverpool defence. Now, the main reason for that is I think there's lots of options in attack for captaincy this season. You've got your Manchester City guys, you've got your Bruno Fernandes, you've got Aubameyang to begin with, you've got probably going to have Chelsea assets as well. So do you really need Salah if you're not going to captain him often? Which I don't think I would. I think if I had Salah, I don't think I would captain him the first 3 game weeks, because I'd probably go Aubameyang the first 2. And then game week 3, I'd probably go, Sterling or De Bruyne, depending on which one I bring in. So I'm asking myself, do I need Salah? Do I need to spend 12 million on a player if he's not going to be my captain very often? Possibly not. So don't be shocked in game week 1 if my game week 1 draft pops up and there's 3 Liverpool defenders there. I've been playing the Fantasy Scotland game over the last couple of weeks, and I've had triple Rangers defence, and they've kept 6 clean sheets in 6 games, which has seen me rise to number 1 in the ranking somehow there. So that again has me thinking about it. I've been captaining a Rangers defender every week as well, so that has me thinking maybe I should be captaining Trent Alexander-Arnold more often in FPL. So it's on my mind. Salah could go, and it could be 3 Liverpool defenders for me to start the season. So watch this space. Question from Andy Penman. How many big hitters is too many big hitters? Good question. I often get asked, what's the biggest mistake you see FPL managers making every season? And I think one of them is when I see game week 1 drafts posted on social media, too many expensive players, 4 or 5, 10 million plus players, and then the rest of the squad is absolute rubbish. So how many big hitters is too many? I think obviously you can have 2 big hitters easily. I think you can have 3 big hitters. You could have a midfield of an Aubameyang, a Salah and a Man City midfielder, let's say, or a Bruno instead of an Aubameyang. I think 3 is probably optimal in terms of 10 million plus, but I've seen teams, it is possible to have 3 and still have your Trent and still have your big striker like a Werner or a Vardy or a Harry Kane, but you do have to cut a few corners then. So for me, I do always prefer a more balanced squad. So I'm probably looking at my latest draft, there's Aubameyang, there's Salah and there's Werner. So you've probably got 2 premiums there. Werner's not far off being a premium. Then I've got double Liverpool defence. I've got 5 million spent on a goalkeeper, and I've got decent subs as well. The goalkeeper's Ramsdale at the moment, but that is not set in stone either. So my approach is probably having 2 premium midfielders, having a 9 or 10 million forward I'm looking at, and then having a bit more cash in defence maybe than other people have. But definitely don't be going down the route of 4 or 5, 10 million players, because it just distorts the balance of the squad too much. You know what? You want to have 11 players scoring you points every week, not 6 or 7. FPL Enigma asks about 3 different topics. So the first one is 4.5 million rotating defenders, long-term best formation, and also price points. Those 3 topics, please and thank you. So I had to include this question because he said please and thank you. So first of all, 4.5 million rotating defenders. What do I think of it? I like it. I like the idea of having, maybe 2 premium defenders and then having 3 4.5s. The 4 million defenders are pretty thin on the ground. Mitchell at Crystal Palace looks the best bet at the moment. But, there's an argument to be made. Spend the extra 0.5 on Mitchell and get yourself a decent 4.5. There's lots of good 4.5s. Vanagra, Leicester have a couple of them. Charlie Taylor, Lamptey, Walker-Peters, there's loads of them. And, it's a matter of sitting down with the fixtures and trying to map out which ones rotate well. So I've had a quick look. My latest draft, I think it's Vanagra, it's Justin at Leicester, and it's a Spurs defender. Now I don't know if it'll be Doherty or Eric Dyer yet. It may end up being no Spurs defender, but just as an example, Eric Dyer Spurs, Vanagra Wolves, and a Leicester defender, whether it be Justin or Thomas on the other side. If he looks like he's going to start the season, those are 3 good teams for rotation in terms of 4.5 million defenders. That's me just having a quick look at it. For example, you bench Vanagra against Man City in game week 2, and then you play the other 2. So have a look at that. Have a look at the fixtures. It takes a bit of time, but you will find articles on social media that people have done the work for you and picked out teams that rotate well. I think I seen a tweet from FPL Salah this morning that Wolves and Burnley rotate very well all season. So Charlie Taylor and Vanagra are a good pair for that. So I do like rotating 4.5 million defenders. It may be something I end up doing myself this season. Enigma also said, what's the best long-term formation? Any formation questions I get in FPL, I always say there is no best formation. I let my players pick my formation. I probably pick my premium players, then I find which players in each position I think are going to be good value, and I let the players I like dictate what formation I'm going to use. I never say I'm going to go 4-4-2 this season, I'm going to go 3-5-2 this season. I'm always pretty flexible, and I usually have a hybrid formation where I can go from maybe a 4-4-2 to a 3-5-2 or even a 3-4-3, maybe rotating some of the your 11th and your 12th player in your team. So don't go into a season with a set formation. Be flexible. Price points. Enigma mentioned price points. A lot of people play FPL using price points. I think Joe on Scout is a big proponent of this. I think FPL Editor is another one. They set up their team. Before the FPL prices were even released, they had their structure set up, or at least a rough structure. How much money they were going to spend on their goalkeepers, how much in defence, midfield, and attack. And I think it's something I've never done in recent seasons, but I can see them. I do understand why people do it, and it can be quite useful in helping you to manage your future transfers. And I've kind of been thinking about it a bit more this pre-season than I have previously. And I'll give you an example. In my first few drafts, I had very cheap strikers, a 4.5 striker, a Mitrovic type, and then maybe an Ings or a Jimenez, or maybe another 6.5. And thinking long term, if you go for 3 very cheap strikers, let's say your most expensive striker is 6.57 million, it leaves it quite hard to get up to a bigger striker later. You're quite inflexible. So that's one of the reasons why Werner has found his way into my team, because I like the idea of starting the season with a Werner or a Vardy or a Harry Kane, because it's much easier to drop down to another striker than it is to jump up. You don't want to be in a position where, let's say your front line is a 4.5 forward, it's Mitrovic and it's Chris Wood, and then Werner and Vardy are on fire, or Aguero's another one. How do you get to them? It's quite hard. You're probably going to have to use 2 or 3 transfers. There's probably going to be a couple of points hits. So in terms of team structure, I do like the idea of having that more expensive striker to begin with. And it's not just that. I think Werner, Vardy and Kane are all very good options in their own right anyway. I would never pick a player just because of his price point. I'll pick him if his price point works well for my structure, but also because I think he's going to get me points. That's the main thing. Question from FPL Quokka. How important are bench players in the early rounds? Should we have viable options or blow our cash on premiums and have non-starters on the bench? Well, I kind of touched on this. I think it is important to have players on your bench who play. They don't have to be expensive. They can be 4.5 million defenders. Maybe you could splash up to a 5 million midfielder on a bench, someone like Souček possibly. But for me, yes, it is very important to have bench options. They will come in quite often, more often than you think. So don't have a bench of non-playing players. Don't have 2 4 million defenders on your bench and a 4.5 million midfielder. You're just setting yourself up for problems in the future there, especially if we're going to have fixture disruption. So the bench is very important. FPL Snorlax, that brings me back to my days of playing Pokemon Blue and Pokemon Red on the old, I don't even know what they were called, Game Boys or Game Boy Advance or something. Snorlax asks, are you sticking to your rules from last season? For example, your injury-prone list of players to avoid. So yeah, like I said, I've ripped down my list of rules from last season, and it's a fresh season, so it's a fresh slate for me in terms of my rules/guidelines. You'll notice I didn't mention injury-prone players at the start of this podcast, so that's something that it's probably the main change from last season. I'm not going to worry too much about injury-prone players because they hurt me last season. Look at Danny Ings and Michail Antonio. They put their injury problems behind them, and I think I'm more of the mindset now that if you avoid injury-prone players, you can also avoid a lot of points. I missed a lot of Danny Ings points. I missed Antonio points at the end of the season as well, probably for the same reason, subconsciously, because I had him on that list. So at the end of the day, if you have a player who's a good player like Danny Ings, get him in, get his points, and when he gets injured, you've got a free transfer, so just get rid of him then. So that's my mindset on that. So I will be sticking to most of the other rules. My strategy, the way I play the game, is not going to change very much because, it's got me 3 top 500 finishes. It got me a 20k finish last season. So I don't think I need to adjust things too much there. Question from Mark Cram. Historically, you are a hit-averse and a boring manager, as you put it yourself. With so many strong options in midfield, will you stick with a strategy or will you rethink? So I think what Mark is saying is here, will I chop and change more? Will I jump on and off, captaincy options more often than the past? I think I may do so, but again, it goes back to that thing where I want to focus my transfers in midfield and attack more this season. So hopefully I won't have to ever make a goalkeeper transfer aside from on wildcard. And likewise with defenders, I want to try and set up with 5 defenders that I hopefully won't have to touch for quite a while unless they get an injury or a suspension or something like that. So that should allow me, in theory, to jump more freely between captaincy options. So I think I probably will end up doing that if all goes to plan with those, goalkeepers and defenders. I'll still be a boring manager though, don't worry about that. Just a couple more questions before I wrap up. Question from Footshark. Is it worth considering an early wildcard to add team value if we expect a big surge in ownership after game week 1? Footshark also asked, what do I think is going to happen with price changes in the first couple of weeks with the likes of Manchester United and Man City players? I think the answer to that one is we don't really know. We've seen in previous seasons that official FPL, they're not clear with how the price changes work. So it honestly wouldn't surprise me if, obviously going into the season, FPL towers know there's going to be a massive surge to Manchester United and Man City players for the first game week 2 and game week 3. So it wouldn't be surprise me if they slow it down and we don't see a massive rise in price for those players. Yes, we'll see them, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's maybe only a 0.1, 0.2 rise rather than a 0.5, 0.6 for some players. They're probably going to have that in mind going into the season, and we have seen it manipulated in the past for certain things, so I wouldn't be surprised. Now, one of the big arguments to an early wildcard is price changes. If you wildcard game week 2, game week 3, you're probably going to get a march on other people in terms of team value. You could easily pick up an extra £1 million over the first game week or two if you game week 2, game week 3 if you do wildcard right after game week 1. And I can see the argument to that. You can use your cash later, particularly when it comes to free hits and wildcards and stuff. You'll have more cash than people like me to spend, but again, it comes down to the manager you are. If you're like me and you don't care about team value too much, don't worry about wildcarding early. But if you are someone who likes to build team value, I think it does make sense to go in game week 2 or game week 3 to help yourself, build that team value for later. So again, it comes down to what kind of manager you are. Question from K1000. What are your thoughts on keeping 0.5 or 1 million in the bank in order to have more flexibility for transfers in game week 3? I always like to keep some cash in the bank at the start, usually 0.5, because what we see, the annoying thing about FPL is every player is priced at either 0.0 or 0.5 at the start of the season. There's no player 12.3 or 12.7. So what that means is once a player rises in price or falls in price, you're in trouble. Let's say I have a Chris Wood, but that's a bad example, he doesn't play game week 1. Let's say I have Mikel Antonio 6.5. If I want to get rid of him game week 2, let's say he gets sent off in game week 1 and loads of people sell him, he'll drop to 6.4. If I wait until Friday to make my transfer, if I want to go from Mikel Antonio, who was 6.5, if I want to replace him with Chris Wood, who's 6.5, I won't be able to do it if I don't have cash in the bank. So a 0.1 drop or a 0.1 rise in the first few weeks of the season, it's basically a 0.5 rise because of how the players are priced in FPL. So for that reason, having 0.5 million or 1 million in the bank can come in very handy. Now, I wouldn't say do it just for the sake of it. If you need to spend 100 million to have your favourite draft, do that. But also, don't spend 100 million just for the sake of it. If you find you've got 1 million, 1.5, 2 million in the bank, don't think to yourself, oh, my team must not be good enough, I need to spend this extra cash. That's not the case. Sometimes the cheaper squads will often outperform the more expensive squad. So yes, if you can, keep 0.5 at least in your bank in the first game week, because it does come in very handy. But again, make sure you're happy with your draft. That's the most important thing. Last one I will tackle. Same question came in from both FPL Heisenberg and Alex Ball. What is your process for deciding on a captain? And to be honest, I think this is something I need to sit down and think about before the season starts. What is my process? How have I been deciding my captains in the past? And do I need to change it? Because again, captaincy was very weak for me last season. Quite simply, I think my process for deciding on a captain is very simple. I don't overthink it. I usually stick to premium guys. So my De Bruyne's, my Salah's, the big guns, the 10 plus million players. I look at the fixtures probably first of all. Which of them have the best fixture, and then it's probably I'm probably thinking about how the team is playing at the minute. Are City scoring a lot of goals? Are Liverpool scoring a lot of goals these days? How are they looking? Home and away and stuff like that. It's probably something I don't put enough thought into now that I'm talking out loud about it. So again, that's something I'm going to do this season. Spend more time on my actual decision as well. I've talked about pinpointing the best captains for maybe 6 to 8 game weeks ahead. But when I own them, if I've got a KDB and I've got a Salah, how do I weigh up which one's better? I think that's something I probably need to spend more time on. So again, thanks for the question, lads, because it's got me thinking how do I improve on that for the new season. So that's it for this week's show. I hope it's given you some food for thought. I think there was plenty in there for you to chew on over the coming days as you tinker with your Game Week 1 squad. If you want to hear more from me, the start of a new month is always the best time to check out my Patreon, which is patreon.com/FPL General. If you sign up this week, you get to try September for free. Any questions you have about that, just send me a message. I'll be back next Tuesday to preview Game Week 1 in more detail. I'll be discussing which players and teams to target for that opening couple of game weeks. Happy tinkering, folks. If you enjoy the podcast, please do give it a review on iTunes or wherever you are. Give it a retweet on Twitter as well if you think other people will find this episode useful. And as always, thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to providing weekly podcasts for you every week this season, which will hopefully help you achieve your FPL goals. Talk to you all next week, folks.